Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to take a look at and then, well, completely smash the conventional wisdom that civilization restarts from zero after a massive collapse.
Right.
We're diving into a stack of source material that suggests the collapse isn't the end of the story. It's more like the midpoint of a cycle.
Exactly. It's the prelude. Because the sources argue it's the moment of reunion, the collision, that actually resets the timer.
And launches the next great centralized era.
That's the crux of this whole deep dive. We're moving beyond just thinking about societal collapse to investigate this concept of the hybridization event.
A hybridization event. Okay.
And the sources argue this is the fundamental mechanism of civilizational renewal. The premise is, well, it's fascinating. When a complex system fails, the survivors don't all struggle in the same way.
No, they diverge.
They immediately adopt two completely different, totally optimized survival strategies.
Okay, so let's unpack this divergence because it's crucial. You have these two groups, they separate for centuries, maybe even millennia.
And they're facing radically different selection pressures.
On one side, you've got the above-ground reverters.
Mm-hmm.
These are your adaptive, mobile, rewilded survivors. They're masters of the immediate environment, always moving, always innovating, just to make it through the next winter.
And then you have the other side, the subterranean descendants. They are the system preservers.
The ones who go down.
They go down, or they wall themselves off. They're hierarchical, fiercely isolated, highly specialized, and, this is the key, they hold on to fragments of the old world's tech and its symbolic systems.
Often literally sheltering inside the ruins of the old world.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to understand how the dramatic reunion of these two fundamentally different groups, after centuries of being totally apart, doesn't just create a new society.
No, it does more than that.
It forms what the sources call a new cultural species. And that's what launches the next great unified centralized cycle. If you want to find the real DNA of the world's greatest leaps, this is it.
And that initial divergence is everything. The sources really stress how profound the separation is. It's not just geography.
It's psychological.
Psychological, cultural, symbolic. So when they finally meet again, centuries later, they see each other as almost entirely foreign beings.
Like creatures from another planet.
Almost, yeah.
And their perceptions of each other are so telling. If you're a reverter thriving on pure adaptation, you see the descendants as, what, structured, rigid?
Symbolically rigid, myth-heavy, technologically enigmatic. These seem physically different too, which we can get into, but it's that rigidity that really stands out.
Whereas the descendants, looking out from their enclaves,
they'd see the reverters as wild, unpredictable, intuitively adaptive, but maybe spiritually unanchored.
Because they lack the complex rituals needed to maintain the old knowledge.
Exactly. It makes perfect sense. The descendants need rigid, ritualized compliance. If you break a rule, the whole fragile system you're preserving might just fail.
The psychology is forced by the survival requirement.
And that psychological need drives the selection pressure. This creates what the sources call pseudo-speciation.
So it's not biological speciation, not real.
No, the divergence is systemic and cultural first. The reverter lineage gets optimized for adaptability, physical robustness, immune diversity.
Environmental fluency. Their world rewards change.
Right. And conversely, the descendants are being selected for hierarchy compliance, for spatial restriction, for ritualized thinking.
They're becoming, in essence, institutionalized human libraries.
A perfect way to put it. And this divergence, it starts to manifest physiologically. This is where it gets really interesting for, say, a future archaeologist.
Okay.
The sources suggest these different pressures lead to actual physical shifts. Think about it. Skull morphology changes because of diet and activity. Bone density shifts based on a high mobility life versus a confined one.
Even facial structure.
Even facial structure, yeah.
Yeah.
Generations of sunlight exposure versus subterranean confinement. It would leave a mark.
So it's like comparing, a specialized deep-sea diver who's built for pressure and darkness to an endurance athlete.
That's a powerful analogy.
They start as the same species, but their environments customize them until they're almost unrecognizable to each other.
Right.
You have two human lineages that look like two distinct people.
But that separation can't last. The collision is inevitable because, and this is crucial, neither group can rebuild a centralized civilization alone.
The reverters have the resilience, but lack the structured memory.
And the descendants have the memory, but they lack the ecological breadth, the genetic diversity. They're a dead end on their own.
So the fusion isn't a choice, it's a necessary synthesis.
Mm-hmm.
The result is a new civilizational blueprint. It inherits hierarchy and memory from the descendants.
And the adaptability and resilience from the reverters. It's a new machine built from two half-broken parts.
And that drives a rapid, often violent cultural transmission. So what exactly are they trading in this merger?
Well, the power asymmetry is key. The descendants are contributing those fragments of the old world.
Stored knowledge, symbolic systems, bits of old tech, metallurgy.
Even agriculture prototypes, they preserve the memory of how things were done, even if they couldn't do them on a grand scale anymore.
While the reverters are bringing the raw materials for growth, ecological mastery, massive genetic diversity.
Mobility to occupy new territories, and just the practical knowledge of the changed world. They know the land.
So without the reverters, that descendant knowledge stays trapped underground. It's inert.
And without the descendants' structured knowledge, the reverters just stay in a mobile, decentralized state. They never centralize.
So the merger reverses the divergence, it unifies the selection pressures, and then boom, a new people suddenly appears in the archaeological record.
And what's so compelling here is how this model maps onto these huge, often puzzling transitions in human history. The source uses the Neanderthal-Homo sapien interaction as a perfect example.
A perfect fit.
A perfect fit. It's a transition that, traditional anthropology sometimes struggles to explain without just resorting to violent conquest.
Okay, hold on. But isn't it a bit reductionist to map such a complex, hundreds of thousands of years long event onto just two simple strategies? How do the sources handle that critique?
They address it by focusing on the system, not the individuals. They argue that ecologically and culturally, Neanderthals map almost perfectly to the descendant profile.
How so?
Highly developed symbolic rituals, deep cave habitation, very low population mobility. They were specialized for a local territory.
Right, often using complex cave networks for long-term shelter.
And their cultural output was meticulous, but very slow to change.
And then Homo sapiens come in as the above-ground reverters.
Exactly. Extremely high mobility, broad diet, adaptive, rapidly changing hunting strategies. A culture that rewarded innovation. We were the high-velocity generalists.
So these two systems met.
We see the hybridization surge play out almost immediately in the archaeological record. After contact, you see a sudden explosion of symbolic behavior and art among sapiens.
A rapid emergence of composite tools.
Combining reverter mobility with descendant technological memory, and then massive population expansion, long-distance trade. These leaps aren't gradual. They look like a sudden burst.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, this redefines extinction.
Completely.
The sources are arguing that the disappearance of the Neanderthal system wasn't extinction in the way we think of it. It was absorption.
Absorption. Their system collapsed, yes, but their survivors were rapidly integrated into the resilient, mobile reverter population.
And their knowledge, their cognitive traits, and their genes, which are still here, up to 4% in non-African populations.
Live on within the hybrid people. The descendant structure failed, but its essence, its memory, was carried forward by the new hybrid civilization.
So if that pattern holds, then what archaeologists call the Neolithic revolutions, those sudden huge leaps, are, according to this model, actually hybridization surges.
That's the core insight. Every major civilizational innovation is inherently dualistic. It requires input from both the preservation group and the adaptation group. The merger creates these sudden, almost miraculous leaps.
Okay, let's break down a few of them. Let's start with agriculture, the big one. How does this model explain farming?
Okay, so the reverters bring the ecological mastery, the deep intuitive knowledge of the land, weather cycles, wild plants.
Right.
But the descendants bring the stored seeds, the memory of cultivation techniques, and the structured symbolic knowledge around planting and harvest. That introduces the necessary precision.
And together, that's structured agriculture. Surplus, settlement.
Exactly.
What about metallurgy? That also seems to just appear.
It appears because the descendants preserve the complex knowledge. Scraps of smelting techniques, the mythology of the forge, the specific temperatures. They had the recipe.
But they absolutely needed the reverters for the mobility, to find the specific ores, and the sheer adaptive trial and error to scale it all up.
You need the recipe and you need the resilience to find the ingredients.
Which leads right to cities, the ultimate hallmark of a new cycle. Cities are clearly descendant-driven in structure, right? The hierarchy, the symbolic governance, the administrative memory.
They are, but they would instantly fail without the reverter input, the genetic and population diversity for growth, the distributed skills.
And the ecological mapping to sustain thousands of people in one place.
That combination forms the first successful city-states.
And I'm guessing the same logic applies to writing and monumental architecture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In both cases, the descendants preserve the geometric precision, the proto-symbolic systems, the blueprint for complex symbols.
And the reverters adapt those into a functional, expansive language that can communicate outside that closed system.
And they provide the labor and resource networks to actually build those descendant-designed temples. Every major leap, from trade to the first ziggurats, traces back to this hybridization.
What's fascinating is that even when the physical evidence of the descendants vanishes, the story remains.
The story remains. The two groups create a myth to explain their sudden, miraculous leap in capability.
Mythological residue. The story persists even after the facts are buried.
And we find these recurring themes across global cultures. Universal tropes. Myths of gods who teach agriculture, or people from the caves.
Figures emerging from below or from hidden places, bearing lost knowledge.
Think of the Sumerian Apkallu, the seven sages from the waters, or the Mesoamerican Quetzalcoatl.
Or even the Irish Tuatha Dé Danann, emerging from the mounds.
The common narrative is what's so powerful. It's always a knowledgeable, symbol-heavy group emerging from hiding, bearing fragments of advanced knowledge, elevating the surface people.
And then ultimately disappearing or being absorbed into the larger, newly centralized society.
It isn't just allegory. The sources argue it's the true history of the descendants and reverters, fossilized in narrative, remembered and retold for generations.
So to synthesize our deep dive then, the hybridization event is the inescapable engine of civilizational rebirth. It explains the sudden emergence of cities, agriculture, kingship models, even the Neanderthal-sapien fusion.
It's the moment the two divergent survival strategies, adaptation and preservation, are violently and necessarily recombined.
And this system suggests that centralized civilizations always restart with the same pattern. The mechanism is, well, it's predictable.
The two essential elements separate. They optimize for opposing realities, and then they collide to create a hybrid society that inherits the memory of the past and the resilience of the present.
Which raises an important final question for you, the listener. If every major leap requires this precise hybridization event, if the cycle is truly that predictable, what forms might the new reverter and descendant groups take in a future collapse cycle?
I mean, considering the hyperconnectivity and the information storage systems we have today, will the descendants of the next cycle be keepers of encrypted digital knowledge, hiding in protected server farms or bunkers?
Focused on maintaining access to fragmented data.
And will the reverters still be the masters of a low-tech, post-internet ecology? The system predicts that despite all our modern complexity, the core dynamic of divergence and collision remains the same, and that it sets the stage for the next civilizational surge. Something to consider as you look at the fragile nature of preservation versus the absolute necessity of adaptation, even in your own world.